Here's one. And here's the other one.
Where's the clicker?
There. This red button to unmute. Huh. I'm not able to load either button. This is very strange.
Well, we'll get on it.
You want me to start?
Um, Sure.
You want the clicker?
Okay.
Yes. Don't forget to ask about Etherpad.
About Etherpad?
Getting people.
There you go. Okay. All right, welcome. First session of Netmod.
Can you hear us okay? Awesome.
Excellent. Okay, so there's the note well. If you haven't seen this before, anything you say or do in the room is considered an IETF contribution. Otherwise, please read it carefully and note it well. What's this slide? Oh, I remember this one. Okay. So this slide is from a couple IETFs ago. It's just basically saying document quality relies on reviews. If you want your own documents to be reviewed, to get lots of replies on them, please take time to review other people's drafts.
This actually was here at the request of the IESG at one point. Is this now considered a failed experiment and we can get rid of it? No comment from our AD, so we'll move on.
Okay, so there is various audio and recording going on here. We have Meet Echo streaming. What does it say? Please, what's this for, Meet Echo? Yeah, so when you come to the microphone, please, first off, only come to well, I guess there is now only the first microphone. Michael will be taking the Jabber scribe notice, and in particular, he'll be looking for your name badge. So please be wearing your name badge in front so you can grab it. And be sure to say your name clearly to the microphone. We already have distributed the blue sheets, so please fill that in. And we have some note takers already, but is anybody else willing to do Etherpad note taking? One more? Okay, great. Okay, so we're covered on Etherpad.
Yeah, you can also find that off the tools page, and then there's the Etherpad 97 link.
Mm-hmm.
So that's easier, sometimes easier to find.
Okay, Michael has already offered to be Jabber scribe. There's the URL for the Etherpad for anybody who wants to follow along. There's the agenda posted to the IETF data tracker as well, but we'll cover it in the next slide. All right, next slide. Again, there are two sessions for this meeting. Today's session number 1, it's a 2-hour-long session. And then on Thursday, there's the 1-hour session. For today, the agenda is first, of course, for the chairs to do as we're doing. And then we're going to go over the upstate design team. This is a 30-minute discussion. And then schema mount, followed by the entity draft and the syslog draft, and the interface models update. And finally, the Yang schedule. At the end of this, there was going to be a presentation for the alarms draft, but that one was removed because Martin couldn't come to this meeting. He is sick, unfortunately. But with the alarms draft, there was a discussion about it maybe being an AD-sponsored draft, and I think there was a discussion as to whether or not there would be interest in the working group to pick it up here. So I think there's a question that we have is if anyone's read the alarms draft and if there's any interest in it. And I guess we're just going to ask that right now.
Well, he wants to make a comment.
Oh, just a quick comment. For anyone who's signed into Etherpad, if they could put their name on the top right corner icon,
Oh,
It would help to know who's taking the notes.
On the color icon.
On
When
the
you-
color icon at the top right. Yes.
Right, if you want to add your name as a note taker, there's a spot for it at the bottom.
Benoit Claes. So before you ask the question, I want to give some background on the alarm one. So Martin and Stefan approached me asking if I would AD sponsor that. And I said, okay, why not? But I would prefer to have it in the working group. So please go first in the working group and ask. It makes sense. Now, one more thing on that draft. During the hackathon, we had someone implementing that IETF, that alarm Yang module. I'm not sure if the email has been sent the mailing list already, but I asked him to do so.
okay.
So, and he found no issue or no feedback on the draft itself. So, which was good, I believed.
Yeah, one other thing on alarms is that there's been some significant work on alarms done in the routing area, not recently, but in the past. And one of the questions I had for the AD, as well as probably Deborah, is if they would be interested over there. I wanted to send a message to the authors as well as the CCamp chairs, because that's probably where it goes. But I didn't get it out. So it's probably worth checking there as well, because that's where the alarm work had been done previously, and they're the guys that care about the technology specific work.
So Tim Carey, Nokia. I will say the BBF is also looking at the alarms draft, right? So it will probably be easier for us to look at it through Netmod than probably through any other group, because this is a natural affinity for us.
Right. I hear you, but if the right place for it in the IETF is in a different working group, then we're going to go there.
You
Put it out
asked, I responded.
No, it's good feedback. Appreciate it. It's probably more feedback for the AD than for us, because the ADs actually decide where work ends up. So, thank you.
So how do we determine which working group it goes to?
We'll send mail, but I think asking interest.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up for this working group, what's the interest level in doing the alarms draft in this working group? I heard Tim mention it. There's a second, three. Anyone else wants to do the alarm draft in this working group? Okay.
How many people want to do it but don't care where it is?
Okay, that's a good point.
Same.
Okay.
Like less people. That's interesting.
Not possible.
Okay.
So we'll ask the other working group as well, and if they have more interest, then I think the recommendation will be to take it there. Okay.
CCamp.
Okay, we'll skip the agenda for session 2. We'll talk about that one tomorrow. Last slide, documents that have been updated since the last meeting. We have 4 RFCs. Congratulations, everybody. Sorry, trying to make this larger on my own screen. Yang 1.1, JSON encoding, use of metadata for Yang, and the routing management model. And that one just came through. Amazing. It's the fastest draft I've ever seen go through. Currently in ISG processing is the 6087 biz. And then there's a number of documents, working group documents have been updated, and we'll have presentations on those during this meeting. Anything else you want to do? Okay, so with that, we can begin. Is Phil here?
That's not what we want.
Phil Schaefer? You want to go to the next one?
No Phil. Okay. We will
Let me
go out of order. No, it's fine. We'll go out of order. It's not a big deal.
Send a text.
So we're going to skip Phil. We'll come back to him, and we're going to go to Lada. Lada, you here? Oh, good. Just figured I'd check. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ladjal Hutka, and we've been working on this schema mount stuff together with Martin Bjerkun, who unfortunately couldn't come this time. The presentation is a bit ahead of time because I expected it to happen on Thursday. But anyway, next slide, please.
You click.
Okay. Fine. There have been a few significant changes to the draft. Okay. Yeah, I can get it out. There have been quite a few changes to the draft and the module, and here they are listed. So now, last time there was some demand for being possible to define any number of mount levels just in place. So this is what we implemented, and I will show the solution. Also now mounted schemas can be defined as conditional, something like conditional augments, again based on an XPath expression that is evaluated in this case on the parent tree, and we dropped one of the two Yang extensions that schema mount used. This is this mount Yang library extension that's not used anymore. Expected a name object, so that. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So first, it's necessary to define the mount points. This is very similar to how it was done in revision 02. So it means, first of all, that all the top-level modules and together with their revisions and features and deviations need to be defined using the now standard way, using the Yang library, which is now in RFC 7895. And mount points are defined inside these modules using the mount point extension, which is defined in our module, but, and this is again as before, they can only appear under any data nodes in the Yang schema. So it's not possible to have mount points just anywhere in the schema tree. A special any data node has to be reserved for such a mount point. And this is how you do it. So you define an any data node and then use this mount point extension. And actually, this is just an arbitrary name for the extension, the full mount point. You can choose whatever you want. So it means each mount point is identified by its name, and the name is here, and the module name. This is the module name where the mount point extension appears. And next, as soon as we have all these mount points defined, we have to specify the schema or sub-schema for each of these mount points. Again, it doesn't work somehow. Same problem here, so I will probably ask you to for me. I had some arrows in my slides. They are missing. Do you see some red arrows here?
No, we saw the errors.
Okay, maybe so. Anyway, so
I think the arrows turned into the arrows.
all right, so it's not that important. So basically,
Actually, it's a good point. Is that if you're doing the slides in PowerPoint, even though it's like a proprietary thing, it's better to send in.
I don't.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, we have a list of mount points. You can see that the key for the list are these two things: a module name and the name of the mount point. And for each mount point, we have to specify the subschema, and it can be done in two ways. The first one is essentially to send the schema constructing procedure to that mount point under which this is used. And that means that this mount point should have an instance, a new instance of Yang library, and possibly a new instance of this mount point list. So basically everything begins again there as it did under the root or at the top level. So this is one option. I will show actually example use cases for both ways for defining this subschema. And the other way, which is relatively new in this revision, is this using this list use schema. No, it doesn't work. Sorry for that. And so this is how this can be used. So we have this list use schema, and again, each entry can be given an arbitrary name. And and this just refers to one entry in a list of available schemas. I will show next how this looks like. And the new thing is that also this when expression can be specified. And of course, there are some technical points that need to be solved here. So first we have to define the context for this XPath evaluation. So the context node in this case is exactly that any data node under which the mount point appears. And the accessible tree, and this is important, is only the parent tree. So you cannot refer to nodes in other mounted schemas, or you cannot even refer to the same mounted schema. Only nodes in the parent tree are available for this evaluation, and the function library is exactly the same as in Yang 1.1. So presumably, functions like derived from or self can be useful here. And of course, we need somehow to specify the namespaces and the namespace prefixes that are used in these expressions. And so for this, it was necessary to introduce a new list called namespace that exactly shows this mapping of namespace prefixes to URIs as usual in XML. So we have to do it extra way. So that's just a minor annoyance here, but not a big deal really. Next slide, please.
Yeah,
Still click.
you can click. How many arrows are on this slide? There you go.
All right. So this is how to specify the list of schemas. That's just a flat list for all levels, because in Yang we cannot have recursive structures. So we have to use this flat list and use leafrefs to refer to its entries. So basically, again, we have the name for each schema that's being referred to from the mount point list. And there are two things there. First is, again, a new Yang library structure. So it's the same as the top level Yang library, just a new instance of it. And then again, we can use the mount point list as before at the top level. So basically, it means that we can repeat this procedure any number of times we like. So the first uses means just a module list for this particular schema that's mounted under a certain mount point. And the other uses is, again, specification of subschemas for the mount points that are defined inside these internal modules.
Go ahead.
All right, so just to recap, this is the complete schema of this Yang, IETF Yang schema mount module. So we have this list of namespace prefix to URI mappings. Then we have the list of mount points. Then we have the list of schemas that are being referred to from the mount points list via leafrefs. And each schema, again, contains a list of modules and revisions and deviations and features. And again, this mount point structure that can effectively make the whole mounted schema structure recursive. And now, yeah, this works now. So as I said, we have two ways how to specify a subschema for a given mount point. So use case for the first one can be like this. So you have, and maybe this can be useful for that peer mount way of mounting some external data. So it means that basically we have this this module and this device root node that serves as a mount point. And in this case, we use that inline leaf, which means that in order to construct the schema for every instance of that device list, we have to go to the device root mount point and find a new instance of Yang library there, and possibly a new instance of the mount points list. And in this iterative way, we can then construct the entire schema. So this means that we don't know in advance the complete schema. We have really to construct it iteratively, and the schemas that are mounted under each of the mount points is essentially arbitrary. So there are no limitations here. So it means that usually the device, it's like for a network manager where each device supplies its own schema that it uses. And this is another use case. Again, it can use alternative schemas, but all these schemas must be here known in advance, so we can then specify the complete schema in place in a relatively compact way. So it looks quite similar to the previous case, except that we now need a new leaf, which is called type here. And in fact, it's very similar to how RFC 7223 deals with interface types. And we use this type.
It worked.
Yeah, no, it maybe.
Just the arrows.
Yeah. All right. So here you can see how this could work just in a very simple case for two types of devices. So we can specify that. You see, and that's in what's in this red frame. You specify a name for a subschema or for a schema, which can be a switch, for example, and then you specify in that one expression that this schema is only supposed to be used if the type is derived from some Yang identity, and similarly for the router device type. So this way we can do similar things like with augments. We can combine schemas and make them conditional and use the appropriate schema for every particular type of device that's defined using some Yang identity. Question?
Yeah, Andy Bierman. Yeah, this seems pretty complicated, especially the concept of evaluating when statements constantly so I can make data within mounted trees magically appear or disappear. That's one concern. The other is that this isn't that transparent. A normal client thinks it's talking to a normal server. It's got a Yang library. It's got a set of modules it supports. Now it's a whole different architecture where within that server, I have to go find all these subtrees and treat that like a separate server within this one. That's really complicated. I would expect the server that's providing all this data that's aggregated from other servers to just present one Yang library.
Yeah.
and do that.
So,
That's-
so you mean that one server can,
So
no
this
matter
is,
what kind of
this is
virtualization?
this is like a proxy, but not very transparent at all. So
Well, I would say a proxy is the previous approach with an inline, where you have really to go to and fetch some data from perhaps coming from another device. And here you can, well, of course.
yeah. So
Uh,
okay.
yeah,
So you're trying to account for. I have a bunch of different servers. They all have different capabilities. This one has deviations. This one does this feature on, that feature off, and then trying to kind of cram them all into subtrees within, the mount point server. I don't know.
Yeah, I know you prefer that every server just uses a single revision of each module, but
The way this sort of stuff's been done before is you just do it in the protocol and use real proxy.
of course, it would be possible just to have one Yang library and somehow refer to this top-level Yang library. That would be possible, but we thought with Martin that this may be useful.
No, that doesn't help. As long as the server can do all this complexity, a client must support all of it. Okay, anything optional on the server is mandatory on the client. So yeah, you can do it 5 different ways on the server. That doesn't really help the client.
A client that doesn't understand schema mount at all can just work with the top level modules. It works as before, so it's compatible. So the client needn't care about these schema mounts, except that the client cannot see, or just can see some data appearing under those any data nodes, right? But they are not described by any schema, as long as the client doesn't understand the schema mount. And if a client understands schema mount, then yes, if we decide to go this way, then of course it has to implement all this. But it's, in my view, it's no more complex than doing the same for augments, right? So it's basically an augment, except that it's
Okay, but it's
So
like
you can-
like an independent server implementation randomly put throughout all the trees. So within each tree, I can have, a different Yang library, it's just essentially all the logic that the client has to do to talk to one server, it now has to do for each subtree that has a Yang mount.
Yeah. As I said, it's possible to use only one instance of Yang library if this is flexible enough. I know that you don't like too much flexibility, but we have to discuss this, of course. Yeah.
So we have something from Jabber.
Uh-huh.
Blazes says, can we make the two methods each at least optional features that makes handling easier? So I think, are they both required is basically what's being.
Of course, this is possible. We had that choice, and we can just use a feature for each of its cases. That's of course possible. And we have currently two open issues. First is whether the mount point extension is really needed. And the other one is some way how to do these schema mounts in a sort of hybrid way. And I will describe both of these open issues in more detail. So the first one is whether we really need to use this mount point extension. The thing is that now it's the name of the scheme of the mount point is defined using this extension, but we can use equally well schema node identifiers for identifying the mount point. It means the any data node. The pros of using this extension is that in the parent data model, the intention of the data modeler is clearly expressed in a machine readable form. I must say that we have different opinions here with Martin. So in my view, as long as we now only limit this schema mounts, these mount points to any data nodes, there is no real need to have extra to specify that it should be a mount point with using some extra means, because as it is now, any data can contain anything, and so if a client understands schema mount, then it has the benefit of really being able to understand the schema that's there. Otherwise, you will just use the content as normal any data as defined in Yang 1.1. So of course, I can see that there is some advantage in terms of the clarity to specify the mount point, but I don't think it's really necessary. And there is a drawback of using this extension, and it is that if you define a mount point inside a grouping, then of course this grouping cannot be used more than once in a single module, because then of course the identification of the mount point fails if you use it twice or multiple times. Whereas if you use schema node identifiers for specifying the schemas for every mount point, then even if the mount points in fact is in a grouping, then the specification for each instance of this mount point will be special, so we needn't this CLR anymore. Yeah, so that's the deal here. Are there any comments on this? Do you like this extension, or should we try to get rid of it?
You know, I got to tell you, you used mount point in two different places in your presentation, and I'm not sure which one you're referring to back here.
This is the extension mount point. That's what in the title.
It's the type?
No, it's the extension mount point that you put under every AnyData node in order to define the mount point. Yeah, so that's.
So if we go back, this is the one you show on slide 3.
Yes.
Oh, no.
No.
You're gonna have to go over all the slides.
Oh, this is going to kill me.
Don't do it.
All right, we're getting arrows this time. Oh, come on.
Okay, so I think we are done now.
Yeah, I think it's done.
There's one more slide.
Oh, the arrows come up.
Right, we use PDF because it's a good archival format, right? Can I pick this up and throw it now? I tried. It didn't work. Hold on, let's try escape. Oh, come on. Ooh.
Okay, so this is the second.
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is this is the one that uses any data, right?
Yes.
And the alternative is you're going to mount through the Yang schema mount module.
Schema node identifier, so we will just tell some path to
So you'd use this instead.
Sorry?
You'd use this instead.
No, in the current revision, we use still the mount point extension, because we didn't want to make the change unless this is somehow agreed.
I'm getting lost in your use of the terminology of what your question is.
The question is,
You want to get rid of
the
mount
one option
point,
is
the
to
mount
get rid
point
of the mount point extension
with it that uses any data.
schema node identifiers for identifying the mount points simply, or the other alternative is to keep this mount point extension, but then we have some problems with, we need to say that a mount point defined in a grouping can be used just once, same module. So in my view, I would prefer to get rid of the mount point extension, but
If I understand you correctly, if I understand your question, the primary use case for this is in the logical network element and network instance drafts. And
no, it's just general. As soon as you want to use schema mount, currently you have to use this extension for every mount point that you want to define.
You've looked at those drafts.
Yes.
Does your question impact that? Those drafts?
No, I think that it can be done.
Then I'm not understanding what you're.
So let's.
But I'll take it offline. If everyone else in the room understands, it's okay that I'm confused. No, he said it doesn't impact that other document, so it means I don't understand what he's proposing, so it's okay. If I don't understand, it's all right.
I believe that you can do the same things, but only in different ways. So
No, I'm saying, do I need to change that at all? The
are you now using this revision of this document, or
yes,
okay?
with
then-
any data.
because then you will have to change.
Yeah, so I think you're suggesting getting rid of the primary use case.
No, it's just changing.
No,
the way
no,
it's
just
done.
change the way how it is, how your modules are written. So
I will
We're
take
running
that.
over.
Okay, so
We,
let's-
take this off.
offline and.
Yeah, and speaking as an author hat of the other document, I'll work with you, make sure I understand.
I can show you how it can be done.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Benoit Claes. So if I look in the world of Yang, this is the #1 priority thing we have to solve because all the Yang modules depend on that. I don't want to run your meeting, but actually it's a good use of the meeting time to make sure we understand. Otherwise, what's going to happen on the list and a month and 2 months, etc.
No, I'm
By the way,
saying
I didn't get
we'll
the-
talk right afterwards. And we have another session, and if we can't, if we come back and
And
I,
this in session #2.
Tomorrow's session touches on this as well.
so if we'll work offline, make sure everything's okay, and if there's a question, we'll bring it to the working group. If it impacts those models.
And that's my issue. You two guys are going to speak together. What about the rest of the group? So either you speak together and you come back in the second session. This is what you understand. We clarified it. Fine, working group, yes or no?
What we'll say is that the models that are presented in the second session aren't impacted. Does that work for you? That Dan's going to present. Benoit, seriously, does that work for you?
Well, I could explain it in more detail, but that would need probably some example. And
I think
don't have it.
I think if we have 2 examples of where we are now and what
Yeah.
we want to do, would make it crystal clear. And maybe
Okay, so let's do it fine. And here is another
he gets to the mic.
open issue, which is
There's a
about
question.
what I
So
call,
there's a question coming.
yeah, Phil.
Phil Schaefer, Juniper Networks. If you're keeping the mount point statement, you should change it because you have 2 mount points. And using the same term twice
Yeah,
is hopelessly confusing.
Which is exactly where I am.
Right.
I'm not sure which he's talking about.
You've got a node in your schema called mount point and an extension statement. One of them needs to change.
okay, so it's not a problem in terms of Yang, but in terms of usability and maybe clarity. It may be, I agree that it might be good to.
I don't know if it's a problem. I don't know if keeping it's a problem with a different name, but certainly using the same name
All right,
is helpless.
okay, I agree. That's a good point.
Yeah, Dan Bogdanovic, I was just trying to do this morning by having, like the same rib name, but in different VRFs, in different NIs, but I would mount, the same rib name. Let's say I have INET 0 and I want to have it in VRF1 and VRF2.
But I don't think this is related to this problem.
It's related to the question of the extent of the approach of getting rid of the mount point of the prior slide.
Yeah, probably.
Because in the current way, both of us know how to solve that problem. In the new way, I'm not sure we do.
So if that's my problem, I don't know how to put it.
Yeah, so here is another open issue that I think first AC, Lindem, had this problem with routing instances where a routing instance is some kind of lightweight virtual router. And so it means in the case of routing instances, it would be useful to use mounted schema containing, for example, IETF routing module, but all routing instances would share a global list of interfaces that's defined in IETF interfaces. But on the other hand, we can also have another situation where we have real virtual routers where first the physical device has a global list of interfaces and each virtual router also has its own list of interfaces and its own routing configuration. So there are 2 questions here. we currently don't have any formal way how to refer to nodes outside the mounted schema. So it's self-contained, and there is no way how to have, for example, leaf refs referring to outside this mounted schema.
Dan Bogdanovic, so the point there is when we have a logical network element, when we create it, we have to assign a list of physical interfaces to it. Let's start just with the simplest case. List of physical interfaces to the logical network element, which is essentially a virtual, in your case, it's the virtual router.
What I have here under possible solution, if you can read it.
You can't do it per each routing instance. You can't do it. You have to, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Per routing instance, you have to do it per virtual router, and from virtual router assign them to the routing instances.
Okay, but still, even if we come up with some notation for referring to some leaves outside the mounted schema, I don't see how we could, for example, use the same module like IETF routing and use it exactly the same module. How can you tell that some leaf refs is supposed to point to some global interface, as in the case of a routing instance, or to some mounted list of interface that's inside?
So we have 20 minutes tomorrow for the presentation on the logical network element and network instance. I modeled exactly this what you presented, and it's part of the example that I will be showing, so we can then have a discussion on that one.
Sure. If you have a proposal how to do this and it's reasonably implementable, we can.
Yeah, we have some thoughts. Right, we have some thoughts, and so. And I'm speaking as one of the co-authors there.
In this particular case that I knew about from AC.
Yeah, so when AC and I talked about it, we went a certain direction, and then when we started doing the details on it, we realized that direction was broken, and so.
Okay, so I thought that this could be a possible solution, and in fact.
Yeah, so we should talk. We should talk because we have some brainstorming too. So.
Right. So let's talk about that. And that's my last slide, I believe. So are there any other comments, questions? Okay. Thank you.
In that case, let's go back to the first presentation. Phil?
Close it out.
Oh, wait a second.
Apologies for my tardiness. This is the report from the.
Can you stand in the pink box and smile? You're on camera.
Camera's over there, though. This is the report from the data store design team. How close? Oh my goodness. All right, I got a beard now. Next slide, please. This group was created because at the last IETF we had two competing drafts and no means of getting them to work together. The differences were minor but very important, and the discussions seemed to go in circles, in particular because the terminology that were used allowed us to say the exact same thing and mean something completely different. Wednesday, the last IETF, we had a breakout session, and the results were, next slide, were this. On a whiteboard, we essentially took the process of doing commit, broke it down into boxes, and then we're able to look at exactly where we were disagreeing in a very precise way. So it was fun. Out of that group, we had, next slide please, a design team chartered by the working group chairs and. Oh, thank you. Two hands. What do I do? And there's the fancy words on the next slide, please. You can click. Oh, I can do this myself. Essentially, it was a small group dedicated to making an actual decision. We are in no way binding to the working group. We were just sent off to talk a bit, and we actually did it. My thanks to the other design team members, Martin, Rob, I'm sorry. How did Rob get up there? And Jürgen, pardon my slide.
I think you mean me.
Pardon?
I was the other member.
Oh, yeah, and Kent and Lou as well.
I wasn't a member.
Pardon?
I was just an observer.
Yeah. What we ended up with was pretty obvious because the outcome of the design group, design team, is the same 3 data stores as defined in the drafts. All 3 are read only. We work to give them very very specific definitions, and that's the outcome. How many people have actually read the draft? Excellent. The draft defines three data stores. The intended data store is you can think of as the post-validation data store. This is the data that's actually successfully been validated. Any undefined device-specific templates have been run. Any sort of config expansion, any inactive nodes have been removed. This is really the config that has passed the validation test. Clearly it comes from running, and in many implementations it may be exactly identical if you don't do any of the fancy stuff. Whoops. If you don't do any of the fancy stuff. If you don't do any of the fancy stuff defined here, then you'll get exactly running, and it is only config true nodes. And one of the outcomes of the group that was not in the draft is that we've actually come to a definition of what configuration means. Configuration means config true nodes. Regardless of where the value came from, that's your configuration. The second data store is the applied data store. This is meant to represent the actual in-use configuration that the box is currently using. It is all of your configuration, all your config true nodes, and whether the source is static, by which we mean the running configuration, dynamic, which means the dynamic databases, or whatever other sources. There may be data that's removed, such as ephemeral interfaces, if resources for a particular config are not available. And there may be data added, data from non-traditional configuration sources like DHCP, dynamic data stores, etc. Each node in the applied data store is tagged with an origin attribute that indicates where that data came from. It may be either static, meaning that it comes from running or intended. It may be dynamic that it comes from a dynamic database, database. Data model would say a default value or something determined by the data model, and system would be that it comes from the system. For the applied data store, you will only see the static or dynamic values. In addition, this is a identity, so you can extend it for example, making DHCP based on dynamic. The third data store is the operational data store. This is your full data from your box. This includes state, statistics, etc.
Okay. Short person, just a minute. Can you go back one? Thank you.
Yeah, who are you?
Sorry. Sue Hares, I2RS chair in this hat, Huawei company supporting. Okay. Now, I read through this 2 or 3 times, and I may have missed something. Apologize. Excellent work. Good step forward. Now I'll come to the question. When you say the value comes from the Yang identity, this is for the intended data store at this point. Is that correct? I lost the context of the slide. All the rest, yep, got the draft. This piece, is this for the intended data store? Is it for the idea is if you're coming in with the ephemeral state, or should I wait to get done?
I think I can answer your question already. The intended doesn't have the attribute because everything in the intended database should be static. So we
Okay.
simply don't bother giving the attribute. This is for the applied and the operational.
Okay, so then I'll go to question 2. Why did you simply call it dynamic? Why not more descriptive, i.e. if it's an ephemeral database or such and such, or make it policy-based function? Why did you go to these few comments rather than an enum or something like that that identifies the data store?
So this functions as an enumeration, but because it's a Yang identity, you can derive additional things from it. So for example, if you want policy or DHCP or something derived from dynamic, you simply define that in your in the Yang model that defines those stores.
May I echo that back because it's an important point. So for example, if it's dynamic and under the dynamic control protocols would come ephemeral I2RS, and you would say within the I2RS protocols, hi, I need to define, augment the dynamic enum or the identifier with the specific ephemeral state identifier that you're working on.
So
Did I
one
understand?
other advance we tried to make in terminology is not use ephemeral, because again, it means two things. Ephemeral interfaces are interfaces that don't appear on your box, and when people think about ephemeral configuration, that's what they're thinking about. So we wanted to use dynamic as the term for.
We're swimming upstream on that change due to the body of work that's out there, including the stuff that's at the ISG. So you've changed. We've been that's a terminology, and we ought to talk later. I think that's a poor choice at this moment, but just because we have existing work, that's a small point. I want to go back to the technology. The point of the technology that you're doing is you're simply trying to identify that it's this dynamic protocol, and then let the Yang models in the other dynamic stores define the specific. And I do have that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Dynamic covers not only dynamic data stores, but DHCP 802.11x.
But you differentiated between DHCP and control plane protocols. You had dynamic configuration protocols, one arrow, and then you had control plane protocols. And Lou, am I out of time? I will go away.
No.
Okay, so
I didn't.
I just-
Do you want to be out of time? Do you want to
no,
be out of time?
I'm sensitive. I'm a chair like you. I'm trying to be a good citizen, good
Okay.
citizen behavior.
So I don't think we used the term control plane. What we did was we tried to say, this is config data no matter where it comes from.
I will clip and send to the list what you have in your document. I think I quoted your document,
I
but
may be wrong.
I may be wrong. But I would suggest feedback dynamics a bad idea.
Yeah. Keep in mind, this is a 0-0 document. You know, this is it.
And that it's only our suggestion back to the group. It carries all the weight of 6 pieces of paper.
Dan Bogdanovich, could you just go 2 pages back? Because I was curious where you were talking about, so this, and you were out of resources. That's intended. And then the applied, just next one, I'm just was looking for something. Okay, so there was missing resources. So you're saying that you will check for the capabilities in the intended, and you will have that the capabilities will be verified in the intended, but then you will not know until you go into the applied if they can be really, essentially executed, because you might be out of the resources for those capabilities.
Are you talking capabilities in the netconf hello, sort of?
Well, I'm talking about in the capabilities of the hardware, what the hardware can do. So, for example, I want to do a QoS, and I'm like, because QoS will be the most hardware specific. Or let's say I want to do an ACL, and I'm trying to see if in ACL I have some specific matching conditions. And now the question is, I want to check what are the capabilities of the box that I can can I really run this? And then the question is, will I have the resources available for those capabilities? Because you mentioned here missing resources, so I just want to know, where do you verify the capabilities for those resources?
So this is actually talking about the interfaces on a device. So if you pre-configured an interface and it doesn't exist, then the ephemeral interface mentality says it shouldn't show up in your operational configuration.
Because I'm thinking from a high-level service model, not from the low-level technical model.
Right. This is a particular use case that the operator community recognizes. I don't know that it carries on to a more generic, if there's a bit of configuration you don't support, do you throw it away?
Because there might be some issues with I don't know, with QoS. I'm thinking mainly here with the QoS, where we might have to do some very even line card specific models. And then, yeah.
Yeah, it's not clear.
Hi there, Eric Voigt, and I also like the draft, what I've seen so far. I have some questions about the relationship of the different data stores. For example, you have lines that kind of connect them, but you don't have a state transition that says, at least that I've seen, that says, I can be in applied, but that doesn't mean I might not be in running or intended. So the idea of having bits of information that tag to say, if something is in this data store, it must also be in that data store, is something I didn't see in the draft. Do you plan on having the relationships of what objects must appear at the same time in the different data stores documented? Part
of the configuration life cycle is that there's no real timing. In particular, you may do a commit. Yep. Something should show up. Something is already in running because you've done a commit. It should immediately be available and intended. It may be a while before it shows up in applied. So is that the sort of information you're looking for?
I didn't see the relationships between them like that. Like, what happens, is it possible to do a look at your metadata and see the metadata that says it's in applied but not see that it's in intended? So the relationship between the data stores I didn't think was explicit in there, and what are the error conditions for what might be a valid read or not for the different attributes for the different data stores. We can take it offline.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Attribute. So section 6 talks about the implications of this change. First, we have to define the data stores. We have to provide protocol support for them in netconf and retconf, in netconf and restconf. The good news is we get to deprecate get, which is a wonderful thing. And the draft also mentions that restconf data needs a parameter for addressing operational state. And the other bit is a clarification to say that Yang constraints apply to intended. And then there are a number of open issues. There was a question, did we want to provide an active data store between running and intended that simply removes the inactive bits? Again, the constraints in operational state, I think they're just ignored. But do we need a statement to say whether a must statement applies to operational state? I think the only thing that's important there is parentage, being able to say what your identifiers are, things that aren't covered by the must constraints. And do we need support for applied in restconf? I assume restconf, wanting a simple view of the world, doesn't care for applied. We use the term static for the origin. I think that's a poor name, but we can't say running or intended because it's kind of both. So we're looking for a better name there. And the intended data store is kind of a fuzzy name. So we're looking for a better name there.
So Phil,
No.
on some of these open issues, the support for applied in RESTconf, we'd also support operational state data stored in RESTconf?
Assumably RESTconf would want operational data store. So it needs a mechanism to address that. But the open question is really, does it even need the applied data store at all?
Okay. Does anyone want to discuss this? I mean, we have a number of open issues on this slide.
Andy Bierman, actually, I don't really feel that strongly about it, but deprecating the get operation, it's only a problem, in particular implementations. Our customers use it. They use it with subtree filters. It's not a problem. It's an easy way to just get a particular subtree that you want. And certainly when it's being used to retrieve config false data, it doesn't even run into the problem of all this extra stuff that shows up. But they're using it with filters, so they're picking out the subtrees they want. And if it has too much data, then it's their own fault, right? So they set the filters the way they want to, and they just retrieve data. I don't see why it's a big deal.
Deprecated doesn't mean remove. Deprecated means we don't encourage the use of it. We encourage the use of the more accurate RPCs, the get state, the get data RPC to get it from the particular source that you're after.
Hi, Rob Wilson, Cisco. So one comment on here maybe is that rather than having support for applied, is that when you do a GET request through RESTconf, you can return the operational state data store by default. And when you're doing obviously a set request, then you're obviously updating the running configuration or equivalent. So just to hide those data stores in that way.
I'm going to channel Martin from Jabber. The problem with get is that it returns running plus state. Filters are good and should be used in get config and any new operation we define. Can't hear you, I'm sorry. Why don't you read it? Okay, I missed the comment. Balaza said, for us, the most important part of the work would be how to connect config data for a managed item, e.g. an interface, to the operational state data of the same object. Will you address that? I read it as he wants to be able to relate an interface, a particular config item from operational state, from config to operational. How do you relate the same?
So the beauty of this work is that it's identical. Your object in your operational state has the same parentage as your object in configuration. It has the same identifiers, the same hierarchy, the same namespaces, the same everything. It's not off to the side somewhere. It's exactly where it ought to be. That was one of the goals of the work. And for Martin's comment on get, just to flesh that out a little, the problem is if you're looking at operational data, it's not associated with your configuration. If you're trying to do a get of operational data, and you have, let's say I go out and I define 10 new interfaces. Actually, let's take it the other way. Let's say I delete 10 interfaces. Your operational data for some period of time would continue to have those interfaces or peers or whatever, but they're not in your configuration. So if you're doing a get on, if you're trying to use the same parentage to get under get to get configuration and operational state, you're either moving away from config or away from operational data. You can't have both.
Mehmet Ersu, still Nokia. I have a process question. I can actually wait if you want to continue the technical discussion.
You're at the mic.
Okay, so I would like to understand where we are going from here. The design team draft, once it gets consensus in Netmod working group, are we going to seek for consensus also in NetConf working group? Because as far as I know, the data store concept in a current NetConf RFC is being updated. And also NetConf documents are impacted. So we need to seek for consensus also in NetConf working group. So if we have both consensus statements, then we can start working on details and try to address different documents. Is this also your understanding?
Do you have a specific request there of how you would like to see it run? How you'd like to see the process run?
I described actually more or less.
Okay, so you would like to see that if at the time that we adopt this work, that we at the same time inform NetConf that this is going on and look for opinions on it.
Actually, I would say look for consensus because I see the
adoption
data.
is in consensus.
I see
Consensus is at the end. This is just an individual draft right now. So the first thing that we have to do is adopt it before we even can call for consensus. The only thing we can say is, yeah, this is where we want to start the consensus process.
I mean, the question is whether Netmod working group accept the proposal written in the design team document.
As a starting point.
Yes, this is what I mean as consensus
Okay.
on design team document.
So you would like at that point that we do the adoption poll in both groups or inform NetConf? I'm just asking for what would you like?
Yeah, I would think it would be necessary that we ask NetConf working group 2 at the same time.
That seems reasonable to say that we're going to run the process on the design team document or that the data store document, run the process here, but we want to make sure we're in sync with NetConf. And certainly, I would personally not expect any NetConf modifications to come from here.
That's right.
So if you're modifying a base NetConf document, I would expect that the process to be run in your working group.
But we are updating a NetConf RFC. The data store concept, the
Yes, but
currently
not- but-
active
but-
data store concept
but not
is
the
written
protocol.
in a NetConf RFC.
Right, but the protocol.
We're not updating a NetConf RFC, but let me just add some more to this.
No, we
So-
are updating the data store concept,
Yes, we agree.
which is currently described in a NetConf RFC.
Right, but we're not doing the NetConf protocol. So when it
Yes.
gets to the protocol,
Yeah,
I'm
but-
referring to the protocol part.
I mean, 90% of the people going to comment on the design team document are involved in both working groups.
Exactly. So we have to choose.
I
one.
don't think there will be any issue, but as a matter of fact, I would like to see a discussion in NetConf working group 2 to be able to come there, that we have a general consensus where people agree on in both working groups on the concept which has been actually perfectly described and prepared.
From a practical stance, we have to run the process somewhere. That said, we have to make sure that both groups are in sync.
Yes.
So I think on that point,
in sync means, in my opinion, we need to seek also for agreement in NetConf working group, because if any NetConf member objects to the design team document, it's not going to work out.
we have to run the process in one place. Yeah.
So my question is this,
So
given,
I assume we need to discuss it together with Benoit. I really apologize. I wasn't available until today. We should actually, the co-chairs discussed this earlier, but as I assume we need to involve Benoit to come to a conclusion.
I'm sure we can work it out. This type of thing happens all the time, and we deal with.
Again, I apologize. I wasn't
No,
available.
it's not a big deal. It's a reasonable thing, and more than that, it's good for both working groups to know about it. So it's a reasonable thing to break up in session too.
All right, so
my question was, given that the implications of all this fall in the protocol bits, not the modeling bits. I mean, this is almost a requirements from the modeling group passed back or down to the protocol groups. Should it be there in the should we view this as a requirements that we pass to the NetMod working group, NetConf working group?
So
I don't really care.
I cut Ken off before, so
Well,
he should have a chance.
I mean, one of the earlier drafts had some Yang annotations, so there was originally a thought that it impacted Yang as well as protocols. And so then which working group do you do the work in? So that's why we felt it would be okay to do it here. But I did want to respond. First, just like in Berlin, we had a breakout session. We're again going to have a breakout session tomorrow from 1:30 to 7:30. I have a room reserved. I'll send out email later on about that. I don't think we'll spend the entire time there, but nonetheless, anyone who's interested in this work, please come and we can discuss, in more detail your thoughts. On Thursday, in the Netmod meeting, we're going to do a 15-minute wrap-up, basically describing what the breakout session concluded. And then I believe, Mehmet, you plan to have also in the NetConf working group a discussion about some of this. Now, remember, everything we do in the meetings has to be confirmed on list. So we'll take it to the list then, the decisions to go forward with this to both the Netmod and the NetConf lists. And then we'll have the ability to move forward with this.
Yeah, we indeed reserve 45 minutes for this topic. You guys can organize how the time slot should be used.
And we should send, the announcement should go out to both lists, and if we somehow forget, excuse us, and please forward it to the NetConf.
I'll send email after this meeting regarding the room reservation for tomorrow. To
Andy
both
Bierman
lists.
again. Yeah, I'm really opposed to changing RESTConf. I want this additional capabilities to distinguish between applied and intended to be optional to implement and not impact devices that don't care about it. My feedback from customers is if the system converges in less than 5 seconds, we just don't care about this at all. And their systems do converge in 5 seconds. It's usually within 1 second, usually within 10 milliseconds. So I don't want to take away, you can add things to RESTConf to do things, but taking away RESTConf data is a non-starter.
I don't think that was a proposal. The proposal was to add a parameter to allow access to operational state.
So there should be a bullet there. It's a missing bullet.
PowerPoint and I do not get along. All right,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, thank you. What's next? So Andy. Andy. Right there. And you have 15 minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna try to go real fast on the entity module, which isn't called entity anymore, so maybe we need to change the draft. So there's been some significant changes to the draft. The terminology that associates it with the entity MIB is all gone, and now it's called hardware, and physical entity is changed to component. Even the module itself was changed to IETF hardware. I think there were some technical issues with the Yang, and that's been cleared up. And I think going forward we won't have a loop with import loop issue that we had before. So there was been feedback from Broadband Forum about some new features to add, and I'm not exactly sure just from this Yang tree diagram what the details are in those new objects of class contained in parent rel pause. And the scope of this work really isn't configuration, but if it's supposed to be pre-configuration, then that needs to be worked out on what exactly that means. And so does anyone have any comments on expanding the scope to support pre-configuration of hardware components, or issues on what that means even? I think we probably have to take that to the list to figure out if people want to do this or not. one possibility, of course, is to just do another module that augments this one. That would probably be my first choice. And another issue was, can we add a reset action to the components, and it was sort of a generic reset. There's probably some complexity here of does every, if you have this, that means every single component has to support a reset, for instance. So, so there's issues of what the functionality really means. And again, this can be done in an augments as well. So my opinion is that the module should go through as simple as possible and add the additional functionality in new modules. So when we get feedback on that, or just a question, you have any comments?
Well, comments on what you're saying. So, from a BBF perspective, this is Tim Carey, Nokia. From a BBF perspective, we've already augmented the entity to do this. And we thought that there was some things that we augmented that said, hey, maybe the wider community might want to, that might benefit the wider community. Whether you take it or not, that's really up to the IETF, but we're augmenting it already in the BBF. I would ask that you don't augment that because we've already augmented it, right? And so I wouldn't take it and make augmentations out of it. If they want to use it, they can utilize the BBF modules. They're public as well. So it's just part of being part of the community where we're offering it to you. If you want to see the yang behind the trees, we'd be glad to share that with you. We've said that on the list. We think that these are some good things that you might want. If you want to use them incorporated in them, then we won't have to augment it. But please don't augment it so now we have two MIBs out there doing the same thing, or modules out there doing the same thing. That's the only thing that I would ask.
Yeah, okay. That's a good point. I agree that we really have to coordinate work so it doesn't get replicated in lots of places. And
can I ask a question? Would you consider bringing your augmentations here as a contribution to this working group and make it an IETF augmentation?
We were working with the entity draft. We were trying to get it into these into the entity drafts themselves, right?
Right.
And that's the approach that we were taking. Is if it makes it into the entity draft, then that's great. Then we'll use the entity draft. Otherwise, we'll just create the BBF augmentations, and then people can use the BBF augmentation.
So we'll end up with an IETF and BBF augmentation that does similar things, and that's okay.
No. Why would you do? What we're saying is that we prefer not to see you try to do an IETF augmentation for the same features. Why would you want to do that as an ecosystem, right? So that's why we were trying to say, here, you can make it part of entity, but if you're going to make an augmentation out of it and build a new draft off of that, that's just silly because the modules are out there. I mean, we've got to learn to be a bigger ecosystem, guys, than just IETF or just BBF. I thought that's what we were doing.
Yeah, I've been trying to talk to Benoit about stuff like that, and I agree that we can't be replicating work. We can't be. Well, maybe there's this Yang catalog thing you want to talk about, Benoit, but yeah, discovering the modules that can be used is an important part of the, using Yang.
Sure.
And so the two different ways you could do this is you can augment the module. You can put this in the same module with if feature. So something like this reset is not mandatory. And then
we're quite open to how you would want to do that if you want to make that part of the whatever you call it, component modules now.
Yeah. I don't have a strong opinion either way. Both will work. And I don't have a problem adding these, especially if they were optional with if features.
Yeah, I think if features would be just fine with what the team would want.
Okay.
Benoit Claes. So just 30 seconds on what happened in the hackathon, because you mentioned the catalog, and I agree with Tim that we have to think of these Yang models in the broader ecosystem. We've been implementing a catalog in the hackathon. I'm trying to put all the different Yang modules we know of. And, I've got access to the BBF ones. I'm not sure everybody has, but that's something that we want to do, right? Provide access. And we're in the process of having the open config metadata attributes next to every single Yang module there. The second thing we've been doing is, and I will send the link later on, it's Joe Clark did a Yang model search web page. Based on the catalog, you can search on anything you want, type def, feature, grouping, regex. So if you search like reset on a RP, on a leaf or whatever, then you will get it. And for the entire ecosystem, this is the end goal.
Oh, that sounds good. Okay, I don't think we have any more slides. It's not going forward. Maybe that's it then. All right, I think we need to take that to the list. I don't see any objections to adding these to the module. So we can confirm it on the list.
So what's left to be done before we can say we're done with this document? And it's fair for you to say, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know. We started out trying to stay kind of true to the entity MIB, and now we're trying to walking that decision back and making it more expanded and more in line with the naming that we like for things, rather than using the SNMP names. So,
Mahesh, Cisco Systems. Could you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, so I thought that was an open item. Since Lou, you were asking, are we ready? There's that open question on pre-configuration of hardware components, right? First of all, I would like to understand, what does it mean in Netcon context to have a pre-configured hardware node that doesn't exist? And what will happen in the context of the data store when this configuration gets applied?
yeah, I think we need to see the full Yang module, not just the Yang tree, in order to evaluate it.
All right.
So yeah, how would we? Your suggestion was they should write a draft and submit it to this working group.
Actually, I'm just trying to understand what might make sense. At some point, we have to say we're done and ship it. And so I was trying to understand if that was a reasonable direction. And what I heard the response is, yeah, that's not worth it. If you can fit it in, there's value to us. If you can't fit it in, we have something already happening. So I thought it was a reasonable response. And you also went on and said you thought you could address it. So I think that's also okay.
But what wasn't clear to me is that have the authors looked at the BBF augmentation?
I have not seen the actual module.
Okay. Before you respond, Jorgen has a comment on Jabber, where he said it would be helpful to have a complete proposals and not just fragments sent to the list. And I'm not sure if he's referring to BBF comments or the one related to pre-configuration. So I'm going to ask him that question while then you can go ask yours.
Yeah, so I think from a BBF perspective, what we said was, if you thought that this was of value, we would be happy to supply the actual Yang that goes behind it, right? It's no secret.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't take.
We just didn't want to spam you guys with a bunch of stuff that we'll send what on the list, or because that's what we're told. So
you can just send it to the list.
We don't have a problem with that. And so that's why we just started. Says you might want to look at the tree. That if you wanted to see the bigger stuff, then we send that stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great to send it to the list.
Yeah, there are issues around conditional enablement and these template expansion. There's a lot of complex features being bandied about which aren't really defined well in the protocols. So they need to get fully flushed out.
Okay, so I'll take that back to the BBF and I'll make sure, and then we'll see, about adding that stuff to the list.
Yeah, and if that's what Jorgen meant, that's
perfect.
It's understandable.
Yeah, all right.
Thanks.
Benoit Claes. And one more thing, we don't always have to wait until we've got the perfect complete model to just ship it. We could just ship what we have right now and still work on potentially the pre-provisioning, pre-configuration, and have a different one, because otherwise we're always waiting for the perfect thing that come very late.
Yeah, and that's the trade-off we have to keep in mind. And now that we've gotten a few RFCs published, and we can start priming that's primed the pump, and we can start pushing them out. Jürgen does say that it was, his comment was with respect to the BBF, just giving the tree, so giving the yang would satisfy that. That'd be great. Thank you. Do you want to move to the next?
Yes. All right. Thanks, Andy. You said that already. So Clyde is coming to the microphone on Meet Echo. I'm going to press the big red button.
Oops.
So
I think they'll take care of it for you. Just get the.
I can see him. Hi, Clyde. I can't hear you yet. Clyde, I saw you for a second. Okay, looks like you're coming back.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Great, thank you. Okay. Next slide, please.
Hold on one second. The computer is having problems.
It looks like we only have one screen here to show the slides themselves. You don't get to see the audio. Or sorry, the video.
I think they do over there. Where?
Oh, okay. I didn't see it.
Clyde, you ready to go?
Thank you.
Yep, they can see it.
Thank you. So the status of the IETF syslog model since Berlin is we had two in-depth reviews, one by Jürgen and the other by Phil, and I want to thank you both very much. The result is more changes to the draft for greater module clarity. We improved the descriptions of the IETF syslog types to match RFC 5424. We removed TLS support until the IETF TLS client Yang file is available. Previously, we had included lines that were commented out in the draft. It was felt it would be better to remove them until we actually have the model. More names have been shortened as a simplification. The log file archive has been renamed log file rotation because that makes more sense. Syslog sign was changed to signing options. And the sig prefix, sig dash prefix was removed. The action buffer was made a feature since it's only implemented by two vendors. And since the draft 11 was published, Jason Stern from Nokia has asked for a further change to action buffer. We had it at one point a list, and he prefers that it be a list, which I think is fine. And so one of the action items will be to do another update to the model to make buffer a list. And then all of the editorial comments from both Jürgen and Phil were addressed. Next slide. So we've placed the latest version of the models in the tree in the GitHub repo. And of course, the draft has all of this as well. I included a link to allow people to compare between the 09 and the 11 draft. And the next slide, we just basically say we're ready, I think, for further review on the list and possibly last call. That's my prezzo.
I think we're ready for last call.
All right. I believe. Oh, got a little echo there. So my understanding is the last hang up on this document was TLS.
Okay, putting Clyde on mute.
Thank you.
Not on mute yet.
Okay. I think we lost our echo. That's good. So the big hang up on this document was TLS. At this point, I think we can move forward. Did we last call this morning?
I don't think so.
How many folks have read this version of the document? We have like almost none. How many have read any version? Based on the most current version you read, whichever version you read, do you think it's ready for the last call, ready to be published? Is the document ready?
06. Tried last call at 06.
So we're not getting a whole lot. Do people have, we'd like to hear if there's any technical reservations on the document at this point.
So based on the Berlin version, because I read the Berlin version, the one that was available, before Berlin, and from my perspective, that was ready for, for the last call.
Okay, so my memory is the last issue again was TLS was the hang-up. The TLS issue's gone, so we chairs believe it's ready to move forward. We'll last call it and hear from the rest of the working group. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Clyde. All right, Rob Wilton. And Clyde, I think you can step away from the mic now.
Push the button.
No, he's on mute.
No, I think.
No, there, you step away.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, ready to go. So, it's gone.
And you have a little bit more time if you need it.
Okay, I probably won't be too long. I'll give you a status update on two drafts I'm working on, the interface extensions Yang model, which has been adopted as a working group item, and also the interface VLAN Yang model that's currently an individual draft.
The right one.
So the interface VLAN Yang model, that's an individual draft, but I'm asking that to be adopted as a working group item. Actually, there's been a call for it to be adopted as a working group item. So just a quick recap of what they are. The interface extension Yang model is defining some common properties on interfaces, the same draft style I used in Berlin, things like MTU, link flat mitigation, loopback, encapsulation, and subinterfaces. And then the interface VLAN draft is adding flexible encapsulation for classifying Ethernet VLAN traffic to subinterfaces. And then that traffic can be forwarded using any IETF forwarding paradigm. And that's designed to be just like any other interface. And the key point here is that without this or something equivalent, a lot of these IETF forwarding paradigms can't be used on subinterfaces. So that's what the use of this work is. First of all, the interface extensions Yang draft, that hasn't really progressed very far. I've spent a lot of time in the design team on the data stores, so there's relatively minor updates to that, and I fixed some compile warnings. There's been relatively little review feedback of that, so I'd appreciate more review feedback on the list if that's possible. The draft's not particularly long, so that shouldn't be too hard. On the interface VLAN draft, this has had more work on it. This draft was previously blocked on an issue concerning as to overlap of the work with a 802.1 working group in IEEE. So the liaison was sent to that working group, and the suggestion was that rather than adopting this as a standards track draft, instead adopt it as an informational draft. I went there, discussed it with them, and they've accepted and agreed to do that. So those issues have been resolved. So at the moment, 802.1 is happy for this draft to proceed as an informational draft. Other things that have been resolved as part of that is it used to have some .1q related types, and they've agreed to take that into their 802.1 QCP project and adopted that. So that's been removed from this latest edition as well. This does mean that there's a dependency on 82.1 QCP, so I don't know if there's any process issues with that. I'll leave that to working group chairs to maybe comment on. Oh, sorry, yes.
Michael Abrams, is there some kind of text now on the work split between IEEE and the IETF when it comes to these areas, which is, so I know there is a IETF and IEEE coordination group. So
yes,
but I can't remember seeing any text on this. So this is just on this case only has been decided, or
it's on this particular case.
Okay.
It's been resolved. So I don't know if it's been, I think the liaison statement was sent to the IETF IEEE liaison alias.
Yeah.
I don't think the status has necessarily been updated to reflect that.
Okay. So as far as you know, this is still case by case basis. There is no like overarching.
Oh, correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and their issue was specifically with this particular draft and how that one relates rather than anything wider.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff that I think that the IEEE probably wants in whatever they're doing. So yeah.
Yes.
But I'm happy it was coordinated anyway, because otherwise, this was my concern until I saw this slide. So that was good.
Okay. Thank you. So the question's open on the dependency on 82.1 QCP and working out if that has any issues in terms of how it goes forward, but probably shouldn't do. And then it's worth pointing out here that the 82.1 working group is formally sort of leaving the door open that they may define a VLAN host stack. That's effectively what's missing from their standards today, or is not well specified. And they may also define a Yang manageability model as part of that. However, as far as I know, this is not imminent in any way, shape, or form. So I don't think it'll happen for quite a while. I've also received some feedback, not on the alias, regarding a couple of issues, open issues, so just covering these here. One was a question as to whether it's necessary to define this Ether subinterface identity type, and why not just use the IANA L2 VLAN. So this Ether subinterface identity derives from both L2 VLAN and also derives from the generic subinterface type. It's actually necessary to make the parent interface leaf mandatory. That was the change that were put into Yang 1.1, effectively allows this case so that you can add this mandatory leaf and be safe with any current uses of that model and that L2 VLAN type. So the proposal is that there should be no change here. I'm not proposing to change this. I think it's actually correct. It also, in my opinion, has the benefit of having a more accurate name, that rather than being tied to VLANs, despite the name of the VLAN draft, you're not actually tied to that in terms of these subinterfaces. You could do other classifications. Other people could define other classifications as well. The second open issue was whether it's possible to align the VLAN tag rewrite leaf or leaves with the 82.1Q VLAN translation leaf. So again, I propose there's no change here. I've had a look at both models, and the capabilities between the two are somewhat different. So the ones in this draft are far more flexible, allowing you to push tags, pop tags, and rewrite between one and two tags, whereas what's defined in 82.1Q is a simple translation from one VLAN ID to another. So for a single leaf, I think trying to coordinate those two, either by using groupings or some other ways, probably not worth the effort. I think it's too hard to do because the grouping wouldn't really work for them, and I don't think that they would want to rely on this draft, and likewise it doesn't make sense for us to sort of import small amounts. So again, my proposal is no change here. If there's any comments on that. No? The last open issue was that it'd be good if the 82.1Q bridge model interface parts of that model augment the encapsulation statement. So that's potentially a sensible suggestion, but that's already deferred to the 82.1 working group. So I will forward that on to Mark Holness and make sure, I think you might have seen already, but see what his comments are on that. I suspect it's going to be hard for them to do that because they want to keep their model fairly self-contained. So that might be why they don't want to do that, but I will follow up with that. So that's the open issues. So next steps, as before, a request feedback, or further review feedback on both of these drafts would be appreciated. Neither of them are particularly long. I think it'd be good to try and sort of push these drafts forward for adoption, and then last call if possible. So, yeah.
So Tim Carey, Nokia, I just have one question on the VLAN draft. You mentioned that the agreement with IEEE was that it was moving from a proposed standard to an informational draft. Could you give me the nuances that really why that's the case? Is that just because IEEE wants to have the ability to create their own VLAN modules?
In essence, yes. They feel that they technically own this this technology. They own the VLAN technology generically, and actually this should be part of a host stack in defined in document
Okay.
queue. So
All right, I
that's
just was wondering
that's
what
the
nuances
reasoning.
were.
So the idea is that this is almost like a temporary time to market solution because it'll be years before they do it, and maybe never.
All right, thanks.
There's a couple of interesting data points in the discussion with them. The number one, and I think the most important thing, is that they're okay with us working on something that really belongs to them. You know, we're working on their, we're entering it, yeah, we're entering their turf, it's their data plane, and we're doing stuff that they normally would do, and they're okay with that. So that's like a huge thing. So that's, and the agreement, Benoit was really in the middle of that more than us. And so that's allows us to do what we're going to do in a little bit, which is pull for adoption and move this forward inside the IETF. So that's a huge thing. The next is that they really don't want it to be a proposed standard because they're not sure of some of the things. They're not sure where they're going. So they don't want it to be a proposed standard. Now that said, the only time that we're going to really talk about what the status should be is in the Shepherd write-up. When we go, even after last call, or maybe last call, we really should know what we're last calling. But we don't have to know what the right designation is, intended status, when we do the adoption. So we're not quite there yet that it even matters whether it says proposed standard or informational at this juncture. But what does matter is them being okay with us adopting and working on it. So for today, what we really want to know is the interest in the working group in taking on this work as an additional piece on top of interface extensions, and whether working on the VLAN model is something the group wants to do. We've had a sense that there's a lot of interest, but we haven't moved forward with it because not wanting to step on IEEE's toes. Now that we know that they're okay with it, what does the working group think? How many people think it's important or worthwhile for us to work on a VLAN Yang model? Looks
A good number.
yeah, it's definitely a reasonable number. How many people have read this draft? Hands going up and down, but it's a reasonable number. It's not as many as thinking that we should be working on it. How many think that this document serves as a good foundation for our work on it? Said another way, should we adopt the document? This is more than the last one, so I'm really getting confused. But from a approximation number, it's all the same, which is it's all reasonable numbers for us to then go bring it to the list.
Right, we're going to confirm that on the list.
So we're headed towards adoption on this. We will worry about the designation before we last call it, and in between now and then, I'm going to ignore what's there.
Dan Bogdanovic, on this draft, it would be nice if some of the silicon guy could review it, because doing some implementation with the merchant silicon vendor, it's hitting some of their issues, so they might help with having some ideas how to handle certain cases.
Okay.
I can give you some very specific.
Yeah, that might be useful. I mean, this is implemented on hardware, so. Okay.
Yeah, actually, that does bring up a good point. I did ask a couple of IEEE folks, who, including from some silicon vendors you're thinking of, what they think about the intended status and where they want to see it end up. And they weren't sure that informational was the best. They thought experimental might be better, but they needed to talk to their people. From my standpoint, experimental resonates with me a lot more than informational, because it's something saying that we're not sure it's going to end up. But again, that's a conversation for when we go to last call. We don't have to have that answer right now.
Okay, great.
Before Benoit shoots me. We'll move on.
Thanks, Rob. And last presentation for the meeting, Shafan. Thank you.
If I could find it. Oh, one too many.
Oh, that's enough.
Oh, there we go. My little tablet's having a problem.
Hi, I'm Xufeng Liu here to talk about the data model for configuration scheduling. First, I'd like to recap of the background of this model. The model was originated in another data model as piece of another data model in the TEAS working group, and it was considered too generic, so we brought the model here. And the model is to define some configurations, scheduling configurations, so that we can, for some certain data node, we can add or remove the configuration based on the scheduling. The draft was presented here before, and we got comments. So the new version addressed the comments, and thanks to Candy, we also got a comment about how the model was used. The model used to define a grouping, and so for any target application model, we want to use the scheduling feature. We have to alter the data model and put the scheduling grouping, and which is intrusive and not convenient. So we changed that. So for this new version, we have a separate configuration data schema trees so that we can define the scheduling in a separate model. We can specify the target configuration object. This is pretty much the same way as the subscription notification subscription is doing. So, but we borrow that idea. By doing that, we don't need to change the target data model schema. So here is the model structure now. So we can specify the schedules and specify which target schema node to be applied to. As an example, we can have in here, let's say we have a list of TE links, and we want to configure a schedule which is repeated weekly for 5 times. And for each time, we have a 1-day duration to enable this TE link configuration. So all this started from a particular certain time, so then we can have such a scheduling configuration data, and so make the TE link object configure and deconfigure at a certain time. So that's about the model. So we like to hear the comments and see if I have any.
Andy Bierman, I'll offer some comments since you asked me to. So we already have the time-based RPCs, which sort of does the same thing, but more general. So I can say at 4 p.m. run this RPC that does an edit config and changes the configuration. So this is a more direct approach. I don't disagree that there's use case here and there's need in various applications to do schedule-based configuration. Some things that would make it much more workable is that you don't allow a schedule on the schedule. So I'm gonna be changing the schedule list based on something inside the schedule list. So since it's part of the data model, it can be scheduled itself, and that's complexity I don't think is really needed. The other aspect is the one object at a time, like one object for each schedule. The other approach of just sending an RPC can do an arbitrary edit, and it can edit anywhere in the data store, multiple points in the data store if it wants to. So I think there's some promise here, but it really needs to be fleshed out in the whole architecture of data stores, how we really manage them. So it could be that this ends up being part of the overall solution, but things like template expansion, conditional enablement, time of day scheduling, these get real complicated, especially if they step on each other. And so it'd be good to have a coherent solution for all these kind of features.
So Andy, you agree this is different from the RPC scheduling because that's not the persistent. You don't see that in the data store. You don't know when that will happen, and that won't be repeated.
I don't remember the exact details. I think there was a way to list what RPCs are scheduled, but
No,
maybe not.
Yeah, if you go back, check on that.
That's a deficiency of that thing then, yeah.
Jason Stern, Nokia. I just wanted to confirm one thing, that the scheduling that changes the configuration, it's intended to have the exact same effect as if a client changed the same configuration.
Right.
In other words, if removing the object, say, clears counters and statistics because you've destroyed an object in the system,
right,
it would be intended to happen here. It's not just changing an administrative state.
Correct.
Okay.
Rick Taylor, as with my DTN chair hat on, we're doing a fair amount of work in asynchronous management within DTN, which although we're now moving towards using the Yang data store model instead of the more bespoke solution we've got, I think we have superset functionality of what you're trying to do. So can I suggest you come to the DTN working group after this and just see what we got a presentation about asynchronous management there, which we hope to bring back to NetConf Netmod probably next IETF when it's a bit more mature.
Okay.
And that's in Yang?
It wasn't, and it hopes to be more, we hope to get a lot more Yang into our data model.
Right, but see, this is a model. To make it functional, we need some implementations for the, how do we do that? In the TS working group, they're also talking about the resources scheduling. So we need that. Here's the user interface, right? So how do you specify those things? To make it work, each application, each component need to have the underlying implementation.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I see the use cases you're going. I'm just saying that we are also doing similar work, right, where I think we already have an existing solution for some of this. It doesn't exist in a Yang data model. It exists in a different data model, but we are translating it into a Yang data model.
Yeah, I hope it can be use this kind of model to work with your underlying.
You're very welcome to come and give input.
So Martin has a couple of comments. What about interaction with locks, access control, validity? And there are details to be worked out. An RPC-based solution is much simpler in this regard.
Okay, we can check on that, but the access control here is the same as how they will be. Doesn't matter if it's from scheduling or from the user, right? So all the access control, all the features, I don't see any difference there.
So you inherit the access control from the access to the scheduling model?
It's same as all the other configuration data. Well, no exception here.
Now, who was the originator is what he's asking for, right? I mean, what's the access control model for it? How do I know I'm allowed to make that change?
Just lean in a little bit.
I'm sorry, this is Tim Carey, Nokia. I think what Lou is talking about is how do I know I'm authorized to, that schedule is authorized to make that change? Is it, how does that server know what the authorization is for that schedule? Is it based upon the intent of who configured the schedule? Is that stated in the draft? I think that's what they're getting at when they talk about the schedule.
Well, it was really Martin. I was reading his comment.
Okay.
But I suspect you're right.
So I did have one question, Tim Carey, Nokia. If you go back to your example real quick, and it just might be my missing it, I missed where the intent on the object was for the schedule. In other words, what's the action and the operation that you would want to do to that target?
Right, here's a link ID equal to link 1. Here's the link.
Yeah, that's just the target.
Right.
Right? What's the action that you want to do? Do you want to delete the target?
Yeah,
Do you want
the
to edit the
configuration.
target? But where's that at in the schedule? I didn't see anything in the schedule definitions where the action and the intent that what you want to do on the target is part of the schedule.
What the auto schedule can do is change the configuration, right? So this default, if you go back here, so if it's included in the schedule, then which means add the configuration. If it's an exclusion, then remove the configuration.
All right. So I guess my concern would be that there's no explicit mechanisms for action and intent on the target, right? If you want to delete something, change something, you ought to have an explicit thing. This seems to be missing the action and the intent.
If you want to have action here, then
Well, you'd have an intent of what you want to do on a target based upon a schedule, right? So there's no concept of an intent or explicit content of it.
right, so here's an implicit intent. Okay, we can make the explicit.
Yeah.
Andy Bierman again. So yeah, I agree with the previous comment that the ability to modify the config, not just to add it or delete it, is needed. But to Martin's point, the way you do this is putting the config into the schedule doesn't guarantee you anything. It just means that we will try to enable this at a certain time, because I can change the NACM config in between the time you did this and the time the schedule is supposed to happen. And then I could delete the interface, and you're trying to change a leaf inside the interface. I've already deleted that interface. So that's not going to work, right? So you have to have the ability to just this is like the RPC model. We're going to try to do this config at a certain time, and it'll fail if it fails.
But that's okay, right? So it's if it's an invalid, then you won't be able to do that. Same as RPC.
Yeah. I guess my whole point was that just putting it in the schedule doesn't guarantee anything, except that it's been scheduled to be attempted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the intention.
Dan Bogdanovic, so you're saying the goal of this is just to have it scheduled for the intent?
Yeah.
And
All right, so there clearly is more work to be done here. But the question is, for the working group, is this a topic we want to continue talking about? So we ask Shufan to go back, refine his ideas a little bit, then come back based on the feedback received so far? Or is the group not interested in hearing about scheduling?
So Michael Abrams. So I think from an operator point of view, the use case, I think Andy said the same thing. I do believe in the use case. I don't know if this is the best solution. So if what I just said mean keep talking, then that's the takeaway I think there's.
Great. So it definitely, to me, that means keep talking. So thank you. Useful feedback.
Yeah, I like to, for all the comments, whoever gives the comments, so probably formulate a little bit and so give me some further information so we can work through on that. Would be appreciated.
So how many others, I'm looking for a show of hands, how many others are interested in continuing talking about scheduling and solving the problem of scheduling? A few. It's enough that we should keep talking. Great. Well, thank you.
All right, thank you.
And we are now 1 minute early, so we can try to fill that time. No. Thank you very much. We do have another session. It is on Thursday. It is a 1-hour session. We're going to focus on hearing about the design team and a few other topics. Thank you very much. Capture it and send it to an email, or I'll capture it. One of us capture it just in case it gets deleted. You want to talk? Yeah. Me too.
I also need
Absolutely.
a bio. So I would like to see with you when you